All right, as usual, a lot of what he says, we probably don't need to even try to figure out. He says so many things that are so clear, that I kind of chalk it up to, I don't know, just my inability. But that first line is question number 7, and this is 11 honors, and we're reading on page 72 of Walden's Higher Laws. He says our whole life, he starts, says our whole life is startlingly moral. There's never an instant's truce between virtue and vice. Goodness is the only investment that never fails. We need to answer that. We need to understand what it means. Particularly the part, there's never an instant's truce between virtue and vice. Goodness is the only investment that never fails. What does he mean by that? This is also very biblical. I told you that his analysis of morality, we would call it morality, is very close to Christian behavior. What does he mean? There's never a truce between virtue and vice. What is a truce? Peace. Like there's a war going on, so the suggestion is goodness and virtue is always at war with us, in you and me. There's always at war. And there's never a truce. There's never a Veterans Day, and never an Armistice Day. Okay, let's just get along. Let's just everybody get along. Good and vice, why don't you shake hands and just get along with each other? He says that's never going to happen. Why? What are the implications in your and my life? And I think that's very biblical statement. But what does that suggest? No ideas there. Yeah.
I think it's like saying no matter what you do, there will always potentially be like differing sides, I guess, between virtue and vice, but if you're just trying to be good, it won't ever like fail you.
It won't ever what?
Fail you.
Okay, yeah. I think we're going to read Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, which we go ahead and read it because it's so applicable to this. Dr. Jekyll was good, and he was bad, yeah.
I left your class early yesterday. I don't think I have.
Yeah, I got it right here. But do you know this? I hate to give anything away, but I thought most people know. Do you know the story of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde? Do all of you know that story?
I've heard that.
Yeah, well, I don't want to, maybe you'll forget it. Please forget what I'm about to say. I don't think I've ever said that to a student. What I'm about to say, forget it. If you want to read it, and be surprised at the end. But Dr. Jekyll likes being good, and he likes being bad. And he figures out a way to be both and never get in trouble for it. Now, the bad side of him, you could get in trouble, but he doesn't want the good side of him to ever get in trouble. Think of that. You have this sterling reputation. You're in great shape. Everybody thinks you're great. But you like to do bad too. And you know that the bad is going to tarnish that reputation. So if you could figure out a way to be bad, and the good part of you never, like in other words, there are two yous. And if you could just be bad and nobody ever found that it was you, that would be like ideal, right? At least that's sometimes the way we think. But he says there can never be any truce between good and bad. And you were addressing that. See, Paul has another point to make. We will read that when we read Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. He also says, I'm good and bad. He says, and I hate it. I hate being bad. Dr. Jekyll says, I love being bad, but I also love being good. Sometimes I like doing good things. Sometimes I like doing very bad things. So I'm going to do both. Paul says the same thing, except he hates being bad. And he doesn't know how to solve it. And you know what his solution is? At the very end, he says, thanks be to God through Jesus Christ our Lord. He just throws his hands up and he says, I can't resolve that. You've got to change me. I think what he's saying, guys, if you are like that, and we all are to some degree, you'll never be peaceful or completely peaceful in your life if you're trying to be good and bad. If you like to do both, and you think the good that you do is going to outweigh the bad, even he says that here, that's not possible. those two things are at war with each other. And as long as there's war in you, you're not gonna be completely peaceful. But like, see, the difference is, if you're a Christian, you're still gonna do bad, but you won't like it. That's a good sign that you're growing as a Christian. You hate it when you're bad, and you don't wanna do it, and you do it again, and you don't wanna do it. And that's what Paul is telling us we're like. He says there's only one person that can solve that problem, and that's Jesus. He can actually make you good. Does that make sense? Because I'm gonna ask you that question again. And me and Julian are the only people who've answered it. So you've gotta, unless you have some ideas, you're gonna have to, go with what we put out there. And then he goes on to say, and you mentioned this, that good is the only investment that never fails. Bad is not a good investment. Bad is not a good investment. All right, so I don't know if you're listening, but I am gonna ask you that. And I really like, I like full answers. If you just gave me one sentence, that wouldn't probably be enough. I'm gonna be asking you when we do take this test to give me something to go over. All right, so, let's go on to number 8. So we'll keep reading bottom of the page. Sarah, why don't you start? And maybe we can, you don't have to read our bottom of page 172. We just only have 3 pages left. But we can get this done in a few minutes. We've got to think about what's being said.
Is it our whole life?
It's the next one. You've got to keep that. I know, but you keep pulling it off to talk to him over there.
We are conscious of an animal in us which awakens in further as our higher nature something.
Why don't you just take that right there? What do you mean? What does he mean by that? It said, we are conscious of an animal in us which wakens in proportion as our higher nature slumbers. Yeah.
I think he's saying, sometimes like our natural, like primal instincts arise, and we're conscious of it when it happens.
I like that. He said the naturalness, again, Thoreau, he's not sure that's all that bad. He just thinks it's low. He wants to live higher. But Paul and Scripture say, oh, it's bad. And so you're saying that natural man in us, it continues to, as it continues to grow, as we sleep, it grows. It's not good. We cannot make a truce. We cannot make a deal with bad. We've got to eliminate it. There's no way you can make a truce with bad. Yeah.
I said that we have an innate animal desire that we lose when we don't necessarily need to be civil
When we don't necessarily be what?
or work with society. When we don't, like in public,
Yeah.
ballistic.
Did you hear that? That's a good point. It's but remember, you got Thoreau and Paul have 2 different views of this. Thoreau says it's not so bad. He just doesn't like, but Paul says it's very bad, that natural man. It's easy, I've said this before, it's the easiest thing in the world to be bad. You don't have to be taught that. You came out of the womb with the ability to be bad. But you have to learn to be good, you have to train to be good. So Sarah, keep reading.
It is reptile, instinctual, perhaps cannot be wholly expressed. Like a worm, which, even in its life and health, occupies our bodies, which possibly may withdraw from it, but never changes its nature. I feel that it may enjoy a certain health of its own, and that we may be well and not yet cured. The other day I picked up the lower jaw of a hog with white and sound teeth and tusks, which suggested that there was an animal healthy and vigor, distinct from the spiritual. This creature is exceedingly by the means that temperance and purity, this is which man differ from brute beasts, said Mencius.
Correct.
It is a thing very inconsiderable. A common herd lives its very same. Superior men
Preserve.
preserve it carefully. Who knows what sort of life would result if we had attained to purity? go to seek him forthwith. A command over our passions and over the external senses of the body and good acts are declared by the bed to be indispensable in the mind's approximation to God. Yet the Spirit can for time pervade and control every member and function of the body, and transmute what in form is the grossest sensuality into purity and devotion. The generative energy which, when we are lost, dissipates.
When we are loose,
When we are loose,
dissipate.
dissipates and makes us unclean. When we are content and invigorates and inspires us, chastity is the fire in man, and what are called genus, herosium, holiness, and the like, are but various fruits which succeed. Man flow once to God with the channel of purity is open, but turn our purity inspires our impurities, casts us down. He is blessed who is assured by the animal is dying out in him day by day. And the divine being established perhaps there is none, but he can cause for shame on account of the inferior and brutish nature of which he is alive. I fear that we are such gods or demigods only upon inside power, the divine allied to the beast, the creature of appetite, and that to some extent our very lives is our disgrace.
Thank you. Did you need to speak?
Yeah,
up?
just a 10-second question.
Sure.
With a show of hands, how many people are planning to come to the watch party tonight as we live stream the basketball games? Zero. That's what I needed. Thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you. Well, she got to the point that we needed to be. Look at the, we'll skip 9 just for a minute. We left out something about 8. It says, we are conscious of the animal in us which awakens in proportion as our higher nature slumbers. We talked about that. Your worst side is, yeah,
I think, at least how I interpret it, it's like says, as our higher nature slumbers, like, I think with our natural instincts, they're always gonna kind of be there, you know, but like, our higher nature is something we have to be consciously maintaining.
Yes.
So when that's not maintained, then our, you know, primal instincts kind of show up.
yeah, thank you for that. That's really, wow, did you hear what he's saying? He's saying, you're good and bad, you got both those things in you. And you will always, what is it called? You'll always gravitate to the bad. It takes work to be good. So you're not good naturally, you're bad naturally. I think he's saying this. I know the Bible says this. And that if you don't work at it, you will constantly gravitate to what is bad in you. So it's this constant war again. And you will never, we understand that, is you'll never be free of that until you're dead. I mean, you'll never be free until you're in heaven. We talked about Cleet Childs the other day. Yeah, he hadn't had a battle with sin in the last 15 years. He's been in bliss, perfect. You're probably not even thinking about it. I mean, that'd be terrible. We looked at all the bad things, the things that he had missed. But people who pass unbelievers, they haven't had that struggle. And you and I are going to have it till the day we close our eyes. And it won't let up. And then when we open them again, instantaneously, that battle will be over. I don't think we'll appreciate how hard life was until that moment. But I like what Jeff was saying, absolutely. You don't work at it, you will always gravitate to the bad. I know in 2 Peter, he makes the point that if you're not, same thing that Jeff said, but if you're not getting better, like look at yourself. Are you more patient? Are you more kind? Are you more pure? You know, just all the fruits of the Spirit. Look, you can just evaluate, say, if you're not more of those things, and kind of gradually getting better, you're not, I like it right here. You can't say, I like it, I'm just happy with who I am. It's not gonna happen. You're gonna always gravitate downward. And so I think he's completely, how are the preceding statements similar or different? I think in some respects they're very similar. I just mentioned Peter, I mentioned Paul. I think that's very much something both of them would agree with. Yes. Yeah, and to use it not a physical thing, if you're an athlete, I don't know how you feel if you're an athlete. I know as a runner athlete, when I was a runner, January, February, March, middle of summer, you think about that guy in Charlotte, you know that you ran, he won the state championship, you want to beat him next time, you know this is February 15th, and you know the guy's working, and maybe he's not working, but that gives you more motivation to work, because you know if you're not working, you're not getting better. Now there's this common sense thing, you gotta rest. We know exercise requires a point where you rest so that the body can, but I'm not talking about that, I'm talking about just like forgetting to go out and get a workout. I think real athletes think that way. They think, these guys over there working hard, I'm not gonna sit here, I'm gonna go out in the middle of February, I'm gonna get a workout. So it works physically. If your body's not growing, it's atrophy, and so it's also true spiritually. So the Bible also likes to use sleep as that example. You're not going to get a lot done when you're asleep, and so morally you can be asleep, and it's the bad side that's growing. So it is this constant struggle, and we can do 10 because she read that. Emma, would you read 10 and? I think this is human wisdom. This isn't divine revelation. But I think human wisdom here might encourage you that the effort to be pure, the effort to be good, is worth it. This is what he says about it.
Number 10.
Yeah.
Explain chastity. Chastity is the firing of man, and what are called genius, heroism, holiness, and that like are but various fruits, but succeeded. Man flows at once to God when the channel of purity is open, but turns our purity inspires, and our impurity casts us down. He is blessed who is assured that the animal is dying out in it day by day, and divine being established.
A couple of things there that I would just point out. If you don't have any ideas about this, I hope you're listening to ours, because we're the only thing you got. So, and if you're not writing that down, some of you aren't. I don't think you're even listening, but if you're not doing one or the other or both, writing down and listening, this is going to be you're going to be clueless as to what this means or how to answer it. A couple of things. He says, genius. By that he means your spirit, your essence. Genius, heroism, holiness are but various fruits that succeed from it. Now, chastity means particularly sexual purity. Man flows at once to God when the channel of purity is open. By turns, our purity inspires us, and impurity casts us down. You cannot be truly creative or productive, he's saying, if you're sexually impure. And you cannot relate to God if you're sexually impure, because God, he's holy. He's not going to accept an unholy person who's unrepentant coming to him. So if you want to pray your prayers and be heard, then you need to be on I'm working toward the purity aspect in my thoughts and my actions, because God, he's not shutting you down, you're shutting yourself down. And I think that's very biblical. It's a motivation to be pure. Now, at the same time, you could probably look at videos, and I know writers and people like that who, they're terribly, you would say, immoral people. And look at them, they're making these records, they're making these movies, they're writing these books. So there's an element of creativity involved in that, but it's short-lived. So I think there's a lot of truth in that. Man flows at once to God when the channel of purity is open. You wonder why God's not answering your prayers? Maybe it's because of that. You wonder why you don't hear about prayer? Maybe it's because of that. Because if that's there, it's cutting off your connection, your relation to God. It says, by turns purity inspires, impurity casts us down. He is blessed who is assured that the animal is dying out day by day, the vine being established. I think you're encouraged. And Peter talks about this, that if you have unrepentant sin, you're going to look at yourself and say, am I really saved? That is one of the one of the problems with unrepentant sin is you're gonna say, maybe I'm not even saved. Yeah, I know, I thought I accepted Christ in my heart years ago, but man, I don't act like it. Maybe it makes you doubt your own salvation. Now, that doesn't mean you aren't saved. It just makes you doubt it. Once saved, I believe you're always are. But if you're doubting it, then you're not enjoying it. Anyway, all of this, in my opinion, you can disagree. You would just need to give reasons why this is number 9, why this isn't biblical. So we would just skip the bottom of the page, start the next page. Emma, would you mind reading? We have 3 paragraphs. I think we can finish.
Start at all.
Yeah.
All sensuality is one, though it takes many forms, all purity is one. It is the same whether a man eats or drinks, or is cohabit, or sleeps sensually. They are but one appetite, and we only need to see a person do any of these things to know how great a sensualist he is. The impure can neither stand nor sit with purity. When the reptile is attacked at one mouth of his burrow, he shows himself at another. If you would be chaste, you would be temperate. What is chaste?
Or chastity.
How shall a man know if he is chaste? He shall not know it. Ye have heard of this virtue, but we know not what it is. We speak comfortably to the rumor which we have heard. From extortion come wisdom and purity, from sloth, ignorance, and sensuality. Then the student's sensuality is a sluggish habit of mind. An unclean person is universally a slothful one. One who sits by a stove, one whom the sun shines on prostrate, who reposes without being fatigued. If you would avoid uncleanliness and all the sins, work earnestly, though it would be at cleaning a stable. Nature is hard to overcome, but she must be overcome. What avails is that you are a Christian. If you are not purer than the heathen, if you deny yourself no more, if you are not more religious, I know of many systems of religious esteemed heathenists, with whose precepts know of many systems of religion esteemed heathenists. Fill the reader with shame, and provoke him to new endeavors, though it will be to the performance of rites merit.
We said earlier when we were reading about reading that it requires a great deal of effort, concentration, focus when you read really good literature. This is hard for me to read, and that's good because it's making me work at it. And it is, if you're working at it, your mind is getting better. Look at question number 10. We want to answer that, and 11, we still need to finish it. But 10, Si, would you read number 10, the question? That's 11, we did 10.
Explain in your own words throws emphasis on the importance of chastity. Consider these statements. From exertion comes wisdom and purity, from sloth, ignorance, and sensuality. And if you would avoid uncleanliness and all the sins, work earnestly, though it be a cleaning a stable. Nature is hard to overcome, but she must be overcome.
So what is he saying about this idea of purity, of mind, body, purity?
I think he's saying that if we strive and put actual work into wanting to be pure, we'll reap the benefits of it. But if we become lazy and take the easy route, we'll become like sloths and sensual, and that like whatever effort you put into being pure or unpure, you'll reap that.
Very well said. Very, very, very good. And you specifically mentioned working at being pure. I think he's also saying any work is useful to fight that. In other words, go clean a stable. That doesn't on the surface seem to have anything to do with working at being pure, but he says it does. Have you ever heard the expression, idle hands are the devil's playground? That's how we're made. When we become idle, we get in trouble. And so he's saying, stay busy, particularly at your age. I thought it was the busiest time of my life until I turned 68, and this is the busiest year of my entire life. But it's the same principle. We are involved in so much caring for other people. Our life is just almost even in the middle of the night. Sandra's father lived with us, and we hear him. He knocks on the door. He says he dropped something. You never know when it's gonna happen. He's fallen. So morning, noon, and night. And when your parents, it's morning, noon, and night, you're constantly, and you have to learn to, it makes you tougher. It makes you stronger. I've come to realize that's who I wanna be. I wanna be stronger and tougher. One of my sons made the comment, he used to play baseball, and he says he wants to live his life heading for home, face down in the dirt, reaching for home plate. That's how he wants to go. He doesn't want to go standing on second or standing, in the batter's box or on deck. He wants to be running home, not walking, going, as somebody said, going horizontal, giving it all. And I think there's so much that I like about that idea, that that is the investment that you're going to see fruit of. You're gonna be a very productive person. So I think he's saying not only what Julian said, but any kind of work is useful to fight these things. And just, don't you wanna go to bed at night completely exhausted? I mean, don't you, isn't that the way you wanna live? You don't wanna sit on the sideline during the game. I never felt good until my uniform was dirty and I was exhausted. That's when I felt like, win or lose, that's when I felt good. When it was completely, clean and I hadn't gotten in the game, you felt terrible. Even if you won the game, you just wanted to be a part of it. I think we're in agreement here. We got probably time for one more. Maybe Jeff can read that. Well, actually, there are 3 paragraphs, but, yeah, we'll go to number 12 in a minute.
I hesitate to say these things, but it is not because of the subject. I care not how obscene my words are, but because I cannot speak to them without betraying my experience. We discourse freely without shame of one form of sensuality, and are silent about another. We are so degraded that we cannot speak simply of the necessary functions of human nature. In earlier ages, in some countries, every function was reverently spoken of and regulated by law. Nothing was too trivial for the Hindu lawgiver, however offensive it may be to modern taste. He teaches how to eat, drink, cohabit, avoid excrement and urine, and the like, elevating what is mean, and does not falsely excuse himself by calling these things trifles.
And we should point out, he's not just talking about sexual purity, he's talking about any kind of sensuality, anything that you do that, even alcohol and eating, anything that you do just for the sake of how it makes you feel good. And we already talked about, the Bible says you can pretty much eat anything, but there's something to be said for overeating or overdrinking or whatever, because it feeds that lower man instead of the higher man. Partly,
Every man is the builder of a temple, called his body, to the God he worships, after the style of pure reason. Nor can he get all by hammering marble and stuff. We are all sculptors and painters, and our rifle is our own flesh and blood and bone. Any nobleness begins at once to refine a man's features, any meanness or sensuality to rebuke him.
so he talks about nobility. You should strive, as believers, particularly since we know the truth, for nobility. It refines you. It doesn't demean you. And if we have time to finish this, Walker, you just finished the last paragraph.
Where we at?
Last paragraph, 175.
Oh, okay. John Foreman sat at his door one September evening after a hard day's work, his mind still running on his labor more or less. Having bathed, he sat down to recreate his intellectual man. It was a rather cool evening, and some of his neighbors were apprehending a frost. He had not attended to the train of his thoughts long when he heard someone playing a flute, and that sound harmonized with his mood. Still he thought of his work, but the burden of his thought was that though this kept running in his head, and he found himself planning and contriving it against his will, yet it concerned him very little. It was no more than the skirt of his skin, which was constantly shuffled off, but the notes of the flute came home to his ears out of a different sphere from that he worked in, and suggested work for certain faculties which slumbered in him. They gently did away with the street and the village and the state in which he he lived. A voice said to him, "Why do you stay here and live this meaning, moiling life, when a glorious existence is possible for you? The same stars twinkle over the fields of Bendies. But how to come out of this condition and actually migrate thither?" All that he could think of was to practice some new austerity, to let his mind descend into his body and redeem it, and treat himself with ever increasing respect.
We'll answer that other one later, number 12. We're not finished, we're not going quite yet. We've got a couple minutes. We're gonna read a couple of other paragraphs, not a lot, not a whole chapter, so we're getting close. We do need to answer that last question.
Should I just take my stuff?
What?